Let's see, is it more? No, good afternoon. Hi, everybody. My name is Perry Harovas. Thank you for coming. I am incredibly excited to be here. Germany is actually one of the two places in the world that I've wanted to visit, and Saturday, I'm going to be spending it in the other one, which is in London. So this has been a wonderful trip already. So wonderful, in fact, that I thought, well, while in Germany, rent a Porsche and drive up and down the Autobahn. So that's what I did. So, I'm really enjoying it. Welcome to my talk. It's kind of a misnomer to call it Maya versus Cinema 4D, or even Cinema 4D versus Maya. And the reason for that is because it's not one versus the other. It's really what is the best for either a particular job that you have to do or a task that you have to do. And that's sort of what I'm going to be going into. Many of you may know of Paul Babb, and he and I were talking about my talk a couple weeks ago in New York, and he said, I kind of don't want it to be us versus them. And I said, no, that's exactly the opposite of what I don't want it to be that either. It is really about the strengths and weaknesses of both of them. I do visual effects, animation, simulations, which of course means I'm a nerd, or a geek, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to do slides mostly in the first few minutes just to give you a background of why I might be appropriate person to talk about this subject matter, and then I'm going to go into live presentations. So this is the more boring part of it, but I wanted to give you some background. I work for this place. Does anybody know what this is? You've seen this before. It's called World Wrestling Entertainment. It's located in Connecticut in the United States. It is a fantastic place to work. I've had my own shop. I had employees. We worked on many different films and television projects, but I get the unbelievable honor and privilege, really, of working here because my role is sort of, in a way, it's self-defined. I started out in the animation area, and I was in the 2D graphics department, even though they use cinema there and they do 3D. In the 2D graphics department for about 2 months. And they said, well, you have too much experience, therefore we can't afford you. They said, but we're looking for somebody that knows all of these programs, and you do. And I think what they were trying to say is I'm old. I'm pretty sure that's what they were trying to say, but that's fine, because I'm 51, and I have used a lot of programs. I'm kind of give you sort of a background of those programs. So this was our most recent event, just to finish this part up, which was a long time coming, but it was the first all-women's wrestling event called Evolution. I just wanted to give you my link to my horribly out-of-date website if you're interested, and I can certainly give you that afterwards. And let me go on, and I will show you my also horribly out-of-date demo reel just to give you some idea of some of the things that I've done. I apologize. out-of-date plugin. So, moving on, give you some of my background. I started out in Lightwave 3D. Does anybody here not know what Lightwave 3D is? Okay, good. Oh, you don't. Okay. So it was on a Commodore Amiga. That's also something you may not know of. And it was a pretty amazing computer for its time. Lightwave 3D was created by Alan Hastings and Stuart Ferguson, and it was part of this amazing hardware-software platform called the Video Toaster, which ran on the Amiga computer. This was my first introduction to 3D, and this was in the early 90s. And I told you I'm old. And I had started out wanting to do 3D in the real world, meaning doing motion pictures and television and directing. And I started to realize that it was incredibly difficult to manipulate people and lights and everything. I had been doing that my whole life with just a Super 8 camera and then a video camera in my backyard with some friends, and it was easy because we didn't really need it to look great. But when I wanted it to look great, it took a long time, and I'm a little bit of a control freak, or a lot of a control freak, and this program really gave me my first taste of what 3D was. So, amazingly, I saw all the things that you could do while looking at this interface. Now, this was advanced for its time, to be sure, but this was Lightwave's, I think this is, version 3. So this is actually advanced by a couple years past the version that I used. You might notice some of the imagery in here. It's from a show called Babylon 5, which used had heavy use of Lightwave. It was also, and amazingly still is also, the only 3D modeling program I have ever used that had a modeling program separate from the animation program. Made it very difficult to go back and forth between the two. This is just sort of how it looked, how fast it was. Gives you some idea of like how slow certain things were. You had to run it in wireframe mode because it just would be too slow to get any idea of what it would be like if you tried to shade it. There may not have even been options to shade it in the first version. I can't remember. And this is version 5, so you can see it's made almost no change since version 3. This is another still from it. This is also from Babylon 5. These were the shadow creatures, and if you've never seen Babylon 5, it's definitely worth seeing. So then after using that, I moved, and that's a polygonal modeling and animation program. After that, I moved on to Alias Power Animator, which ran on a Silicon Graphics Indigo 2, which you don't see anymore. And this was the interface for that. And it was the first program that had really put a lot of effort into the user experience. Now, when you look at this, you may think, oh my God, that looks like it'd be a horrible user experience. But compared to like Lightwave, it was actually much faster. It had the ability to use the spacebar, and you could quickly select things from a dial. It had quite a lot of features that I unfortunately can't show you. I can just show you stills. So it was primarily NURBS-based, and this is a piece of my brain that I'll never get back, so I have to use it. I apologize, but NURBS stands for Non-Uniform Rational B-Splines. Okay, got it out there. It's worth holding on to. The software was $15,000, and the hardware was $20,000. So this was the price of entry to professional animation and visual effects in the 90s. And this was at the low end. So I took that $35,000 and worked with a man named Roger Corman. This is his IMDb page, which is the Internet Movie Database. It's a little hard to see. There actually is text on there because he's created so many projects. So I'm just going to show you some of them just to give you an idea. If I can get out of this. I use PCs, so using a Mac is sort of like, well, it's not worth it. There's a lot, you could see it. He created some incredible classics that I worked on and didn't work on. So my first film with him using Power Animator from Newark, New Jersey, the carjacking capital of the United States. And if you don't know what carjacking is, it's basically stealing cars with a gun while you're driving the car. That's pretty much what that is. So, and one of my cars did get stolen while I was there. So I worked on this film on the left. My visual effects were in this film and in this film, but I didn't work on this film and I didn't get paid for this film. And this is a Roger Corman special. He reuses things. So he made a sequel pretty much immediately to that film. And so I got paid an IMDb credit for that one. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of the special content that was Black Scorpion, because you will be able to see, actually it might even be worth, do we have the sound here? No, it's not, it's fine. You will see something special in here, and it's amazing that it's on YouTube
They're
now.
almost as smart as me.
So this was a Porsche. It was basically just a body, and it was a Corvette underneath. It had no pedal, because I drove the car on set in Los Angeles. It had no no brake pedal. It was just the stump. So you were taking the chance that you might not be able to stop. If you did stop, you might stab your foot because there was no pedal. But I appeared in this film, and I'm going to show you where I appeared in the film.
I'm going without a map, you dig?
This guy is showing the Black Scorpion how amazing the car is that he built for her. And
the white Black Scorpion.
I'm sorry to make you watch a little of this until I find it. Oh, here it is. It's a shitty movie. That's coming up.
Don't worry. This glass is
It wouldn't
polarized
actually be
and
better with
bulletproof.
sound, believe it or not.
It also acts as a
I know you think it would, but it wouldn't. Here we go. So the bottom guy there with hair is actually me. And the top guy was my business partner at the time. So we took it upon ourselves to put ourselves in the film as the two criminals that they were hunting down. So that's my claim to fame on the movies. So let me skip back to here and move on. I also worked on this classic with actually some good actors. Nothing against Joan Severance, but worked on some pretty cool things. Richard Belzer from some shows in the United States. Where's that one particular shot that I wanted? I had this queued up, but then it ended up skipping ahead. You have to see like the amazing effects that were produced in Alias Power Animator at the time in the 1990s.
Your remains a mystery. I am transporting more blood.
So those were practical,
now.
and this was all digital. I mean, amazing, huh? It's all digital. Did you realize that? Thank you. And this was actually the first use, these two films, the first use of digital visual effects in a Roger Corman film. Might even be the last for a while, because he ended up spending much more than he ever did before. He spent $60,000 for 60 visual effects shots in the 90s, which is not a lot of money. All right, so after this, I was asked to beta test Alias Wavefront version 0.01. It was an alpha. It was running on that same computer, and if you've never seen it, this is what Maya used to look like. Go forward a little bit to some of the footage of using it.
That you can choose from, so that the animator who ultimately should be in final control is in final control.
All this stuff you can't really
Swagger.
show.
You direct and the character performs.
So,
You're able to
believe it or not, this was
abstract a lot of the
groundbreaking
underlying
and,
controls of the character.
You can set it up so
This guy
I'm not
here
a programmer. And
was
normally I would have gone
overused.
to a
He
C
was,
programmer and say,
quite
write me an interface that
famous for
does
being
this.
the Maya
With
cowboy.
Maya and Mel, I'm able to do that myself.
It's really
And I'm
nothing
also handing this
compared to
character
what we
off
can
to
do
other
today
people.
in
And the easier
really
that I
even
can
on
make
our
it to
phones.
manipulate the character, the more
But
productive
at the
they're going to
time,
be.
the fact that there were blend shapes
With Maya's
that
fully
were,
integrated
that could
sound
be
sync
mixed
capabilities,
was
getting your characters
groundbreaking.
to
But
talk
the thing
is
that I want
fast and
to
interactive.
explain to you was every groundbreaking thing
We're going to be
starts
putting
out as amazing.
traditional
and then
animators
becomes,
and not someone that always does 3D work.
because
How
it
can
always
we
gets better.
put together an
So,
interface that would make it easier for
Maya's
them
use
to
of
animate a character?
blend
And
shapes
this is
at
something
the
we're
time
able to do in Maya or
involved
not in other software.
selecting every single separate model and combining them all. You had to keep every model inside your scene. So if you had 100 blend shapes, you had 100 copies
Well, in terms of
the
dynamics,
head
Maya
hidden
offers
inside your
capabilities
scene,
now
which,
that
as you can imagine,
we really
would dwarf your
haven't
scene,
seen in other
and
packages.
slow it down.
Written their own code for things like this, but
Okay, let me move on here. So because of my use of Maya, I co-authored this book here, and I usually, when I've given some of these talks, bring the book, but the book is really heavy. It's like 800 pages, and I usually drop it on the floor because it makes a loud sound, and I didn't really want to carry it, like, you know, from the United States, and I thought, oh, maybe there's a PDF version. So then I looked online, and I found there's a pirated PDF version of my own book, which was really cool, so I downloaded that. And I'm not going to take my laptop and throw it on the floor so it makes a loud sound, but I just want to show you, there's a link to it right there, and let's switch to that now. I don't know where it is. I think it's here. Preview, where is my PDF? Mac users, how do I get back to the desktop faster? Anybody know? I'll just hit end show and I'll do this. And go to here, and I put it in here, just so you can sort of see, get an idea of what it looks like. Mastering Maya, where is it? Do I have it here? Come on, where's my pirated version of my book? I had it somewhere over here. Let's do by kind, and it's one of these. It doesn't really matter. It's long and boring. I know I have it though, and it's a little annoying that I can't pull it up. But I'll probably pull it up at a time that doesn't like make any sense, and you'll all be able to see what it looks like. So let me just go back to that. Go to here, and then okay. So I used Maya for 10 years, and I'm going back and forth. How do I get this full screen? Control F. Nope. Oh well. I used it for 10 years before I moved on to Softimage. So Softimage was originally what was used for the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. Softimage was and is, in many ways, still an amazing program. But Softimage was purchased by Alias, and 10 years into my using it, it was purchased by Autodesk. It was purchased for its assets. There was talk at the beginning that it was purchased and it was going to be lifted up and given a better life by Autodesk because they had a lot of money, and they still do. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and in the end, what we found out was it was purchased for the intellectual property. There's a lot of data in there that is pretty groundbreaking. So the interface looked like this, and I have a little clip of it so that you can sort of see what it looks like in use. So it had a paradigm where on the left was all your tools, and on the right were all the things that you could do with those tools. So if you were to just take this bar on the left and put it at the top, you'd have sort of the same idea as Maya, as Cinema 4D, which is really actually easy to use. It's an amazing thing that has survived where the context of your tool being on the right has really helped. And now with double monitors, everybody sort of has gotten used to leaving all your tools on one monitor and then your interface, your main interface on another one. So this was sort of like using the early versions of it. And version 7 was certainly far along, but it had not developed into what it was about to become, which was something called Softimage XSI with ICE. So ICE was called the Interactive Creative Environment. It used this right here, along with a node-based graph. So this is the animation mixer, which is very similar to what we have in Cinema and what Maya has. It had a nodal shading workflow. And this was Softimage ICE, which looks complicated, but I mean, everybody says it looks complicated, but it really isn't. They say the same thing about Espresso and everything else out there. Excuse me for a second. It is complicated in the beginning, but then you start to realize that the power of something like this and what is the promise for the future, in my opinion, of node-based architecture inside of Cinema is not only can you share assets. So if you look at this string to array, it's going to 2 different complete tools. It's not duplicating them. And so you make a change in one and it changes instantly in 2 or 20. But you also have the ability to do this in shading. So one checkerboard node, to be very cliche, can change all the instances of that instead of having to have copies of that. So if I switch to this, we go to the end here. Right here. You can see that red area here, that selection. It had weight tools that were per polygon and per vertex. And this made it easy when Softimage was killed for me to transition into Cinema. And the reason for that was it doesn't visually look the same, but a lot of the tools are the same in many ways, in the way they work, in the fact that you don't need to pick one thing and another thing in a specific order before that tool gets applied, like you do in Maya. And in a lot of ways, but not every way, it was more procedural than Maya was. And I'm going to argue today that Cinema is far more procedural than Maya is, but not as procedural as Houdini. So we go back here. Like I told you, this is going to be the boring section, so we're almost done with that. So after that, I went on and started a school called Tribeca Flashpoint Academy. It's currently co-owned by Robert De Niro, the actor from the United States. And it was in Chicago, and we had some really good facilities. And we started out the first year, I wrote the curriculum for the 3D animation. We had 100 students in the entire school. I had 11 students. And then after 5 years, when I left, moved back to the East Coast of the United States, we had 600 students. So it grew kind of fast, and it's nice today for me to see it continue to go and get better and better. One of the people I had the pleasure of working with while I was there was Tyra Banks. She's a model, if you don't know who she is, and she has become a television personality, and she was an author, and she came to us to work on the cover of her book. So I did the front and back cover, and then somebody else did the typography, one of my coworkers. So she was very particular about how it looked, but she was incredibly hardworking and very easy. And this is the first time I saw it in in like physical form. So that is the end of the boring section, because right after this is when I decided I have to get out of using Softimage because they've now been killed. What do I go to? So my choices at the time, as far as I was concerned, was Modo, Cinema 4D, or Houdini. And I took a lot of time going through all three of those to decide what it was going to. It was about 4.5 years ago, maybe 5 at this point. And I said, I'm going to try all of them in production because there's no other way, in my opinion, to really test something. And there's probably no other stupid way to really test something. But it's trial by fire. So I did a project with each inside of those programs. So the project that I did inside of Cinema, which was the first one that I tried, I stopped halfway through using Softimage and switched the project to Maya. To Cinema 4D. Too many programs in my head. And in Cinema 4D, I thought, oh, I'm just going to be able to take the geometry, move it over, and keep going. But what I found out was it was actually harder to translate and keep the same look and more freeing to start from the beginning. So something I used to tell my students all the time when I taught was, yes, you may have to redo this, but it's just going to be better and it's going to go faster. And that's actually what happened. So I got a better result starting from scratch. I redid all the dynamics. The client was waiting and looking at their watch, and I got more predictable results out of Cinema 4D. So ultimately, after doing all the tests, I decided that I was going with Cinema. So let's get to the meat. I can't believe I'm on time. Let's go to the meat of the day. And please feel free to ask any questions in the middle of this that you may have. So I'm just going to start up Maya. I'm using Maya 2016 for a reason. And the reason is this is one of my corporate workstations, so we have not facility-wide upgraded to Maya 2018. We use Cinema 4D and Maya in conjunction with each other. I am trying as much as I can to push everybody off of Maya, and they're not going for it because they feel like it is the industry standard. And I hate that, that term. I think the industry standard is being professional and doing your job on time. So Maya version 2016, is what we're running. Now you may ask yourself, why is he not running 2017? Does anybody know why I'm not running 2017? If you have any idea? No, but that would be a reason. The rental system would be a reason, but that's not the reason. The reason is because 2017 was so unstable, we had to revert back to 2016. I mean, so unstable that Autodesk actually told us to revert back to 2016. So when the company is telling you, you should go back, there's something wrong there. Excuse me for a sec. So that's why I'm running 2016. We are about to upgrade to 18. So has anybody used Maya in the room before? So a few people. Does anybody have a story of using Maya and having problems? Because if you don't, I have. You do. Go ahead.
Well, I haven't used it in the past years, but I was working at a game studio just a few weeks ago, and we wanted to render out a very simple, just a plane with a texture. And as you probably all know, they have now Arnold as their default renderer. We created that default light and rendered it. It turned out black. Then we started to investigate why it was black. We found out that we had to crank up the intensity to 1000.
Mm-hmm.
Then it rendered properly, but the viewport was totally white.
Yep.
So you basically have to turn down the lights to work in the viewport and turn it up again to render.
Yes, and that's not a.
That was one experience that I have made in the last 5 years. But it was the only experience that I had.
Well, that's not a bug, it's a feature. Like, I mean, that's what you'll be told. Yeah, there are many stories. And the thing that's interesting is that I use whatever is the tool that's best for the particular job. So it's not like I'm here to bash Maya all the time. Some of the time, but not all of the time. And I'm going to show you some of the advantages that Maya has. But I'll give you some of my stories. So my number one, remember I've been using Maya for 20 years. My number one problem with Maya has not been fixed. So right off the bat, that's my biggest gripe, is they haven't fixed something that's 20 years old. I have submitted it, so it's not like I'm griping about it and I haven't submitted a bug. And Josh can attest to the fact that I like to submit a lot of bugs. But this plugin manager is the bane of any Maya user's experience. So the plugin manager, for some reason that I haven't fully been told, does not always hold on to what you have loaded or auto-loaded. So this is where you load or unload plugins. And over the course of the years, I have loaded a plugin like Mental Ray or V-Ray, and then it shows up the next 2 or 3 times, and then the time after that, it doesn't show up. And so I have to reload it, and it happens over and over and over again. And it is writing itself into the environment variables, so I don't know internally what's going on, but that's my number one gripe. And I'll give you a story as to what my number 2 gripe was, and I can't visually show this. But I was working on a kids animated show. We had 2 half-hour television episodes to do. I was directing it, and we had 6 people working on it full-time, including myself, which made 7. And we had probably about 40 minutes of animation done. We had 6 months to do an hour of animation with a few amount of people, and we were using Maya at the time. And one day we opened up a scene that had this character in it, and the character is this lumberjack, and he's this large guy, and he has like a big axe, and he's talking to somebody, and he was supposed to take his axe off and just go like this and be threatening in a way. And I opened up the scene, and as he was threatening the character, he was saying, "I'm gonna get you." And he was just stuck in a T-pose the entire time. And we had animated this like many times. And we went back a couple versions. We ended up, thankfully, having a guy on staff, one of my former students from New York University, that I had taught a weekend class, and I had hired him. He wrote a script because he found out that the references to the animation curves in Maya were broken. The links were all broken. So the animation still exists, but the link between the two, the geometry and the animation, was gone. So he wrote a script to reconnect it. This is a great example of why you cannot be, in my opinion, still to this day, you cannot be a single user Maya freelancer without either knowing scripting or knowing somebody that's willing to do scripting for you. Because Maya heavily holds itself together based on scripting. So to continue or finish the story, we contacted Alias Wavefront, or it might have been Autodesk at the time, I can't keep track of them, and we said, here's the issue we're having. They said, yes, we know about that issue. We said, well, we fixed it. We are happy to give you the script if you disseminate it to all the users of Maya, because other people are having the same problem, and they refused. And they said, no, it's coming in the next update. And we said, when's the next update coming? And they said, like 9 months to a year. And it's because they knew that their, quote, power users, their users that mattered to them because they had many, many hundreds of installations, had their own internal fix. And to me, that was unacceptable, and that was sort of the beginning of the end of Maya for me, and that's why I transitioned into Softimage. So let me show you some of Maya. if you have not used it or really seen it. And I'm also going to go into some of its strengths as well. So let me just make sure I stay on track. All right, so Maya is a program that is not procedural. And by procedural, I mean it is not something where you do one operation and then you do another operation and then a third one, and you could go back to the second one and make changes and have it filter down to the third one. In a couple cases, you can do that, but not in every case, and it is not very stable when it does that. So what Maya works on is something called order of selection, and that sounds similar to order of operations, which is how Cinema works, but it's very different. It basically means that you have two objects. If you select them in the wrong order, it tells you it doesn't know what to do with it. If you select them in the right order, it executes a command, and then you have the result. And sometimes you can go back, and sometimes you can't go back and make changes. So I'll give you an example of that. So I'll take this and Control-D to duplicate it, and bring these two together, and select them, and I'll go over here to modeling, and Booleans union. All right, so it created a union, and you can change a couple things. You can change the difference or to intersection. And so if I leave it on intersection, you can see in this window right here the objects that are used to create this. So I have one of the spheres, and I can move it around, and I have the other one, and I can move that around. And it's updating, and then I have this one that's the combined version. So let me do this same exact thing in Cinema, which I have open, and it will move, and I can show you that. Go back to Maya. So if I select that version, I can move it as its own model, and I can move its pivot point and all that. But I cannot, well, here's actually the point of this. I cannot change the objects that are in there. So if I do the same thing here and hold down Control, so I get another one. Whoops. Select the two of them. And we go over to Bool. I'm going to be a little schizophrenic here today because I'm swapping back and forth between my old brain and my new brain. So I drop them in here, and I get the expected result, and I can take the two and I can move them around and do what I want. Now here is the difference between, in my opinion, between Maya and Cinema 4D in terms of being procedural. I can take any other object and drop it in there and get rid of one, and now I have a completely different result. I can change the number of divisions, as you can see them changing there, which means that I can do R&D, I can sort of rough something out with Cinema, and I cannot do that in Maya. And to me, as somebody that wants to get things done, wants to do it fast, this is important to me from a workflow point of view. I can't stress to you enough that there's a constant struggle between power and ease of use or speed. You can't have all of them all at the same time. You're going to have to get in depth with technical things if you have more and more power. The problem is that some people think power is the only thing that matters. If anybody's ever watched any of the car shows out there, and they're talking about how much power a car has, and like Jeremy Clarkson is a great example. All he cares about is power. He says, power, all the time, as if that's going to solve the problem. The problem is that power comes with its prices. So I have switched over 27 years to thinking ease of use and flexibility was a power of its own. And it's made a huge dent and increase, dent in my workflow and increase in my ability to be productive. So again, I can move this around and I can do whatever I want to it. So if I go back to Maya, I'm going to go over here and delete the history on there. So it got rid of the other two. Basically, it's the same as Cinema 4D, where you bake it down to its resulting object, and now it's just a polygon object. Yeah?
So those two spheres, you can't exchange them with any other object?
No.
It looks like you could.
No, you can't. In fact, yes, it does look like you could, but if you open them, you can see that the only thing in there is a transform. So it's connecting the transform. It knows where the original was, but you can't put a new object in there. It wouldn't let you, but even if it did let you, it would break, because everything that comes after this is dependent on the same number of polygons and the same objects that are in there. Now you could, before making this the way it is, like totally baked down like I had, you could go in there and change the number of them, just like you can in Cinema, but you cannot switch anything else out there. So that's what I mean by sort of halfway between procedural and not procedural. Yes, yeah, you can do that. So I'll get rid of that. So I want to balance this out with some of the positives of some of the things that you cannot do in Cinema that you can do in Maya. And this is one thing that I still use to this day. In fact, I showed you an example of that in the demo reel. So Maya has this thing, and they've moved it, so you're going to have to forgive me because now I have to look for it. Oh, here it is. I got to it faster than usually. They have something called paint effects. Now, paint effects is something called splatting. So it is taking samples along a curve. The curve is being drawn in screen space, as far as I understand. And along the length of that curve, it is putting images, square images, with some kind of alpha channel. And the more samples, the more images you get along that curve, and the smoother the paint stroke is. So you can do it in 2D, like this, or you can paint the scene. Actually, I don't want to save that. As amazing as that is, I don't want to save that. Okay, so I do that, and then I rotate around, and it has created a 3D object out of this where those paint splats were. So when you do it in 2D, or when you have a 2D brush, it's doing the squares with the alpha channel, and some of the brushes allow you to do a 3D version, but not all of them. So, and you can see it's now in my interface here. So I'm just going to grab some paint effects brushes, and this is the one where it's hard for me to find because it used to be completely in its own area. So it is somewhere in here. Outliner? No. It is in the, they changed the name to Content Browser. Gee, I wonder why they did that. All right, so go to Paint Effects, and you can see that there's a lot of brushes in here. So some of them are useful, you know, flowers and things like that. So I'm just going to show you those. All right, and these are 3D objects. And you can see that they're being sampled along a curve here. And they're 3D objects that, if I render them, they render fairly fast. Now, this is deceptive because it looks like a very smooth piece of geometry. If you look at the actual geometry over there on the left, it doesn't really represent the same thing. And you might notice, if you look at some of these leaves here, and then you look at the leaves here, these are more round. This is an example of that splatting. It's taking a square with a circle alpha channel, and it's sampling them along the leaf, giving you something that looks rounder, even though this is just sort of square geometry. So, but it has the advantage of rendering fast. So you can use that. Grass is one of the best ones. So like carpet, grass, and now each time I do this and I lift up, I have a completely different stroke. So if I go over here, and it's a little hard because the interface is big, it's a little hard to show you everything at once. Let me just go back to this. So this is recording pressure along those curves. Each one of those samples has its own pressure curve, which is fantastic because I can go in and change the pressure or the size, if you will, of any particular clump of grass. But I just want to do it fast. I don't want to have to go in there and select, how many are on? 294 objects in here. So if I go to my grass carpet, these are all the options that are in there. All right, so this is kind of what I mean by power versus speed and ease of use. I may not need to ever do any of these things, but I want them easy to access and hidden so I don't have to worry about all of this. And I know that Maya is 20 years old, but the interface has been updated. So it's a little disorienting when you first use Maya, I think, for people today. So I'm just going to try to find something on here that is maybe useful. So multi-streaks. So we zoom into this. No, that's not going to be visual enough. Tube selections. Nope. Yeah.
Difficult is it to prepare some samples yourself? So a little brush.
To create a brush? You cannot create a brush, but you can mix brushes and save them as presets. But you cannot create your own brush. No. So let's turn wiggle on, so at least that's visual. So as you can see, it's per stroke. So one has it and one doesn't. And if I render that, you'll see it renders very fast. Okay, there's no shadows on. And I'm getting zigzags and the regular ones. Now, you can change certain things about this. So I can change the number of blades of grass in here after I spend way too long trying to find it. And it will give me a result that's sort of like what I want. But what I'm always going to be tied to is the curve. I'm trying to find just, oh, here it is. The curve that I originally sketched that's underneath there. So I'm never going to get that sort of look that I want of covering the entire object that's not going to be tied to that actual curve. Now, there is an advantage to that in that I can animate along that curve if I want to. I can have things grow along that curve, and that's really useful. But if I want to cover something with it, I actually have to resort to using a tool that they have, which is in here. Effects, paint effects, and I wonder where they put it now. They actually have moved it quite a few times. It's not the most exciting thing, but it's a tool that basically says fill. And the way it works is, as I'm trying to stall to try to find where they moved it to, the way it works is that they sample the number of polygons or vertices on here, and it covers it based on that. That is similar to what we have in Cinema in terms of how we can use the hairbrush, the hair tool. So let me just do this, and I just want to show you sort of like the trade-off. So yeah, I can't go and paint, although I'm sure you all know there's a workaround where if I want to grow grass from here, I can use a weight map and I can paint a weight map and I get the same thing. But I don't get that visual feedback that you get with Maya, certainly. But I have 20 by 20 segments on here, and I'll just make it into a polygon object and put hair, and it's at each one of those vertices, these guide hairs. And I can certainly change that like that, and I'll render it, and you can see I'm getting a lot of coverage there for those particular 10 guides. And those 10 guides are only there for the animation. So the more guides I have, and I can change them at any time, the more detail I can get in the deformations of each one of these. Maya is always tied to that curve, so I would have to go in and redo that curve. So let me show you what Maya's hair, I'm sorry I'm a little obsessed with hair, but there's a reason for it. Okay, so they have something called N-hair. So N-hair is based on their nucleus environment, and nucleus was their first of many attempts to have a unified dynamics that works across many tools. Because part of what has happened over the years of 20 years of Maya is every time they have a innovation, they leave that innovation in there, and then they bring in another innovation. But that innovation doesn't work with a former innovation, usually. And one of the most impressive things as a new user a few years ago of Cinema was, wow, all these new tools are working with the old, shitty particle system from, version whatever of Cinema. You can use any tool with any tool, and it doesn't matter if it's an old one or a new one. Now, there may be some exception to that, but it's incredibly gratifying that I don't feel like I have to learn something and then abandon it at some point for knowledge that I'll never get back. So N-hair is this. Now, this is their hair solution. And to get rid of that, give you some more real estate here. And I'll make this longer. Let's make this 3,000 frames. And press play. All right, now, one of the first things that I was shocked about when I started using Cinema was how interactive it was. After years of being away from Maya, I went back to use Maya and realized there are a lot of things that I didn't know I was missing. So one of them is I can't move this around while it's simulating. I can sort of move elements of it around. I can grab the geometry, but as you'll notice on the left and the right, there's no geometry here. But if I press stop, it shows up. So I say, all right, I'll select the sphere, and I'll press play and simulate. But my manipulator goes away. So I can't do it. So I can middle mouse button drag, but it doesn't update while I'm doing that. So it's now a wig. There is a way to do it, which is to type in what I want. All right, but this is going back to the early days of 3D where you had to type things in, and I'm sorry, but we've evolved past that, in my opinion. There's another problem with these, and the reason I don't use it is when you render it, it looks like garbage. I can get it looking better than this, but it is fast, but it is, every one of those clumps is tied to one guide hair, and the guide hairs I have to interactively paint on myself. I can't just sort of dynamically increase them or decrease them the way you can in Cinema. Getting the smoothing of the hairs is also somewhat more complicated than it needs to be. But I'm just going to show you one thing in here, which is the clumping of it. go to the hair system. You can see that there's multiple objects in here. There's curves left over from when I did the grass. They never went away even though I deleted the stuff, so it starts to bloat, so I'm just going to delete those. You have to keep real track of your scene and be really fastidious about naming things and particular about things, and my wife might tell you that I'm not, so I try to be when I'm in something like Maya. So I have the hair system here, and I will scroll down and show you I have some things in here that I can do. I can do self-collide, so I'll turn that on and press play. And it's just pretty much just as fast. It's not falling down quite as far. And that's good. Let me go. And it's got the ability to detect the edge or the vertex of the collision. I can resist my stretching, so if I lower that, it sort of becomes very elastic, and it can stretch more, and maybe if I make it lower. Well, once again, it's not interactive enough, but it's being a little bit more bouncy. If we scroll down here to, where's the clumping? If you guys see the clumping, then just call, oh, there it is, clump width. But there's a problem in that the clump is always resolving to a taper. So you have to know how to go in here and adjust the clumping, and this is my least favorite named tool, by the way. You have to know, and this might be a second least favorite one, you have to go in there and change all of these things in here to be able to get a better result. And that's too bad. You shouldn't have to do, in my opinion, this much work to get something to look good. So if we go back into here, if you look at this from my point of view as then a new user of cinema who had come from the supposed land of more power and more ability, I was looking at this as sort of like with new eyes. Like when I first saw my first example at SIGGRAPH of cloth, my jaw was on the floor. And this is a similar example, but now at this point it was after 20-something years of being a professional, using software and saying, oh my God, I'm having another one of those moments where I can do something that gives me the speed and the power that I need. So I'll go in here and I can say, well, I've got 100 guides, but maybe I want 1,000 guides. And I don't want them to be on the vertex. I want them to be on, I don't know, the area, so they're a little bit more random. And I want to adjust their length. And it's all organized in a way that makes sense to me. And then I had another one of those moments when I went in here and I said, oh my God, I can cut the hair. I had long hair in college, by the way. I know you don't believe me, but I did. So I can go in here and do this, and it renders really fast. It also looks like garbage, but I also haven't put on any shadows. So let me put some more shadows. Move up here, and go to my shadows. I want to change my shadows to ray traced, which I'm old enough to still have the gut reaction that ray tracing is slow, but it's not slow anymore. And NVIDIA just proved that about a month and a half ago. It's now something we can do in real time. So you can sort of see that there's shadows off of each one of those, and it looks a little bit better, and we got some shading going on right here. And I can go in there, unlike those Paint Effects hairs, and I can pump up more hair in there to 50,000 and get more density. And really, it doesn't take that long to render that much hair. So I was really shocked when I saw this, and I said, wait a minute, why is Houdini and Maya and Softimage, why is it getting all of the press about this? and this to me is more powerful. And I realized a lot of it was press. A lot of it was the marketing of a particular corporation. Because when I used it and I was talking to my peers, we all had the same gripes about Maya. It's just, it's, quote, the industry standard. But it's the industry standard because they meaning Autodesk, coined that phrase, the industry standard. So everybody that repeats that from now on is giving them a free plug, a free marketing plug. And I would say this whether I was speaking for the Foundry, for Moto, or any other 3D vendor. I find it as sort of bad practice to perpetuate this myth that it's the industry standard. So let me just talk about dynamics for a second. And I have, how many guides? 441, so let's make that. I like to do, this is why I'm a good beta tester, because I like to make things crash. I'm getting really pretty incredible feedback. Now, yes, they're not colliding with themselves, and it would slow down a lot, but it's more feedback than I was getting when I was using Mayas. And I'm getting a nice rendered result in a pretty short amount of time. Well, it doesn't look good there, but you know what I mean. So let me move on. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Yeah.
So first question is, do people actually use NHAIR in production?
Mm-hmm.
Second question is, if they don't, what do
They do, but they tend to buy external tools to solve the problem. And I know a lot of my friends use 3D Studio Max, and it has a reputation of being like just a plugin environment. I didn't want to go down the road of software that has to have a plugin for everything. Now, for some things, I think it's great, because if you can get a plugin developer that's doing an amazing job at something that's a really hard thing to solve, then that's worth it. But after some number of years of doing hair, it's not a very difficult problem to solve anymore. And I really think that it should be better, like, sort of built in. Now, because I'm fairly new in the last like 5 years to cinema, I don't know when the hair was implemented, but I know it's been there the entire time I've used it. I'm assuming that it's been there a long time because I've read people griping about it, which I think is funny because I'm griping about Maya's and I'm saying, oh, Cinemas is great, and then you guys are like, oh, this sucks. But I think it's all kind of relative to what you're coming from. Does anybody have any other questions before I bore you some more? Yes? Get out. Yes.
And it doesn't seem like cinema has as much praise when it comes to body modeling. Have you had experience in that? And is Maya better, or is it just an experience or an exposure thing?
That's a good question, and I will cover that right now, because I actually wasn't going to cover that, but I think it's actually worth covering, and it's fairly easy to do so. So you'll have to excuse me, since this is not something I prepared, but it will be pretty easy to show you. So if I go into the modeling section here, it has NURBs, non-uniform rational B-splines, and it has polygons, which they call meshes, and you can adjust each of them. They call NURBs surfaces, so it sort of keeps every year being pushed off to the right. Eventually it'll be off the screen. So the mesh tools has edit mesh and mesh tools. The difference between the two is a little weird and undefined. You're creating polygons here, you're creasing them, but creating them and creasing them to me are two different things. Why are they in the same separate category as editing mesh? I would think creasing would be part of editing mesh. But, you know, that's just the way they decided to do it. So if we look at some of these things, we can see make whole, multi-cut, all of this. But there's also something that you should be aware of in here, which is the modeling toolkit bundle. So if we unload it, oh, it won't let me unload it. Oh, that's nice. So I have to uncheck it. So I'll do that, fine. I don't mind quitting Maya. Giving me a beach ball for quitting. There we go. Now, to be fair, Maya on a Mac is really not a great idea, but I had to have something that I could easily move across the pond. See, I sound really European when I say pond, I think. Probably not, but let me think I do. So now if we look, we have a few less. We have mesh display, we have mesh tools and edit mesh, but there's not a lot of difference in here. And the things, if you look at it, the things you'll find that are gone are very specific tools that they do not support. They don't support the modeling tools in the modeling toolkit. It's an add-on feature. They will tell you that they don't support it, so it's not like they're trying to pull one over on you. It's just strange that it needs this extra plugin and they're unsupported tools. So if I look at what it can it do all the same things? Yeah, of course it can. I can right-click on an object and I can select. It's really hard for you to see there. Maybe if I go down here. No, it's because of the, I don't know. You see this rotating rotary thing? This on a different or better display would be a little bit more easy to see, but it does make it quick. This is a holdover from Power Animator, as well as holding down the space bar and having immediate access to your tools. It's basically all these tools up here that are under the space bar, which in theory means that you can go with just a blank scene without any of the menu options or the icons over there. And it is true, you can do that, but it means you have to change your muscle memory of where you find a tool. So to me, it slows it down. To other people, they're very used to it. So you can see there I've got highlighting. I can select something. I was really happy to see that there was control drag in Cinema to extrude something, because that was something I was used to in Softimage. There isn't the same thing here. It's this, and if I hold down control, it doesn't do what you expect it to. So you have to go in here and try to realize where, oh, there's the extrude. And then you pull it up there, and it has this multi-tool, which, if I go into here, shows me I can move it up or down, or left or right or whatever. I can restrain it to a particular plane, and I can scale it in any one thing. But the thing that's kind of interesting, not the good version of interesting, but interesting is that I have to, if I'm using a tool like this, notice there's no scale in there in the middle. I have to select one of the scales first, then I get the scale in here, and then I can proportionally scale it. So it gives me the ability to do this, but in my opinion, it slows down my creative inspiration. And it's not a Maya versus Cinema thing, it's a Softimage versus Maya thing, in my opinion. So I wish the control would work, but it doesn't. So if we go in here, that to me is easier than having to hunt down through any particular menu item. I also like the ability to drop things in a subdivision surface, and Maya doesn't have to do that, but again, Maya is doing it per object. It's the type of thing where, none of these will be a good example of this, but I'll just throw another cube in there, who cares? Take this and, hello, there we go. And move this over here, and take this one and just drop it in there. Now I've got it smoothed, and I just swapped out which one was which, and I didn't have to worry about, well, this one has the smoothing and this one doesn't. I can just get rid of this one, and I can keep swapping it out, make my modeling, and have this always smoothing it. So I can have a global smooth across a bunch of things, or I can have it just per object. In Maya, if we look at the way they do smoothing, if I select all the objects, and I have to go to object mode, so I right-click on here and go to object mode. So I've selected objects. And I can hit the 3 key, and that smooths it, but that is per object, and if I go and create another object, then I have to smooth that object, and I can't just swap them out. Not that there's anything wrong with like doing that, but if I go to render it, even in its own renderer, it doesn't render it smooth. So you have to render, I just don't understand. You have to render it with either Mental Ray, which now you have to pay for, or Arnold, which comes with it. But Arnold is only one license for one copy of Maya. So if you have a render farm, you have to buy multiple copies of it. If you own the software, you still can't render in a render farm environment with multiple copies of Maya, because the version that comes with it is not a version that can be ganged together into a render farm, even if you have 30 copies of Maya, which I don't understand. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes, you can. And that, I think, it's been years. It's in one of these stupid menus here. Or I can just add divisions to it and do the number of divisions. But it's using a different algorithm to do it. It's using exponential or linear, but it's not using the Catmull-Rom version.
What actually happened when you pressed 3? You subdivided it, but was the subdivision an attribute that was already on the polygon object?
It's a built-in attribute to Maya, not to objects. So you can smooth things if you hit 3, but it doesn't actually, as you saw, smooth it. It smooths it in a way, but it's smoothing it based on the renderer being able to smooth it and showing you an OpenGL, but it's not actually smoothing the object. In order to smooth it, you have to add subdivisions. That's why I find the paradigm of having the subdivision object in Cinema more useful, because it's taking care of that, and I can just put things underneath it, and I don't have to worry about, well, did I actually smooth this? Like if I don't have this in wireframe mode, I don't know if that's got the divisions on it or if it's just a visual display of smoothing that's not going to render when I go to render it, like that. Yeah. Yes, you could. I mean, at this point, you can certainly smooth a polygon object, and you'll get the divisions. But it's not, once you smooth it, there's no undoing the smooth. You can undo, but if you smoothed an object and then you change the color of a light, and then you smooth the object again, and you go back 2 steps, then you have to recreate the changing of the color of the light because it's not procedural. So, so that is it's a real like impediment to quick workflow and to be able to try things out really fast. How are we doing on time? Okay, perfect. Did that answer? Okay. Sorry, because that probably was a little more confusing because I didn't practice. Okay, so the next thing in my list of stuff is volumes. So how many people have used 20? Okay, so not quite half. So I just want to tell you one of the most impressive things about 20, and I've been using it for a while now, is the volumes. And it's not like they invented the math that's going on underneath the hood, but the implementation of it in cinema is, in my opinion, incredibly easy to get your mind around and to be able to use. And none of this should be construed as me doing a commercial for Maxon. This is my feeling of using it in production. So I'll make that, well, I actually don't have to, so I won't make it a polygon object. I'll keep it parametric. And I'll go into the volume builder. Now there's nothing like this in Maya, which is fine because there's nothing like paint effects in cinema. Like I said, they each have their own strengths. I like this because it follows the same philosophy that the rest of cinema does as I've experienced it, which is being able to get one level of detail and change the level of detail as I need to or want to. So being able to go down to 2 and getting a better result, but then backing it off as much as I want to, even to that, is pretty useful. Now this also has a really interesting element, and this is sort of what I was talking about in Maya with the splatting technique. So if you imagine each one of these squares always facing the camera, which is what they do in Maya, and then it has a circular mask on it, the more of them that you have, the smoother that you're going to get the end result. So this is showing you a flat sample of a volumetric space, and the more detail comes from having smaller and smaller and smaller cubes. So you have to lower the voxel size to get more detail, which in terms of naming might be a little bit hard leap intellectually, but when you realize that these are 3D objects, and if you have smaller ones and lots of them, that's why you get better results, then it makes sense as far as I'm concerned. So you can do quite a lot of things with this, but one of the things that I was really impressed with was if I create something like this and drag it in here, I immediately get the end result that I'm looking for, and I didn't have to do anything, I just dropped it in there. But if I go over here, go to my volume builder, I have these two objects. I can change their order at any time. Now, it's not making a difference right now, but it will in a minute. I'll change this to subtract, but again, it won't make a difference. But I'm just going to turn this back on to union and show you there's a radius here. So if I increase this radius much higher, say there's the beta tester in me. Just peg it till it wants to die. 20, there we go. And then I will make this helix have a smaller radius, so do like 50, like that. And go into here, and then I'll change this to subtract. So that's something I would not even begin to know how I would go about modeling it. Never mind modeling, I mean, not that it's anything, it's a weird shape, but it's the type of thing that would be very difficult to model. So if I want less detail, I do that, and if I want more detail, I make it smaller, so I'll make it 0.5. There we go. So I have a radius and I have a density. So the density, and if you've ever seen the movie Back to the Future, you'll know why every time I say the word density, I think of Back to the Future, because there's a line where one of the characters is trying to say, "You're my destiny," but he says, "You're my density." It's just the way my brain works, or it doesn't. So if we look at this and I take this back to union and make the density smaller, you can see what it's doing. It's doing, again, a sampling along a curve right here. And I could go in there and I could use a cloner, but knowing that it's working like this, to me, is powerful because I don't have to use a cloner if I don't want to. There's nothing wrong with using a cloner. It will work exactly the same way, but I have the ability to use this like a cloner. The advantage to the cloner would be if I wanted any other shape, like a cube or something like that, but I tend to use spheres a lot. So the voxel size gives me more detail. The density along this curve gives me more detail because the higher this goes, 0.05, you start to see there's more and more of them. And if you just crank it up, whoops, not that. You crank this up, you get so many that they're sort of blending together. And the radius is just the radius around that curve. Now, it's my hope that at some point we'll be able to do things like control the radius along the curve so we can get it larger in the beginning and smaller at the end, or vice versa. But to date, that's not something that's in there, but I certainly think that that would be useful. As a workaround, though, you can certainly do a sweep around this curve and have it be smaller at the end, and then use that as your Boolean tool. So I don't even think of that as a workaround such as the word is. It's more of just that's the way I would go about doing it, and this is a new tool, and I want it to work like the old tools. So hopefully it will start to get some of those controls. So as you zoom in here, you can see a little bit more that's what's going on. Now, part of what I find groundbreaking about this is the ability to go in there and change things so quickly. So make this smaller here and drag it in there. And if I want these to be smooth together, I can add a smooth layer onto this. And right now it's just smoothing the cube, but like Photoshop, if I move it up to the top, now it's blending these two together, and I can go in here and increase the number of iterations. So I'm getting more smoothing right there. And I can change this to subtract, and everything still continues to update and work. And if I take off the smoothing, I have that result. So again, procedural and flexible, and able to do things that you just wouldn't expect. And here's the example I was thinking of when I was talking about the particles. So we use the old particle system, and one that I would never use like to do particles, but I would use it to do this. So if I do volume builder, and I'm just going to get rid of these just to make it clear to see. So I have this emitter inside of here, and I have those. And if I go to the emitter, I said the emitter, there we go. I have a radius, so I can make that 5. And you can see immediately a result. But what I find really useful is I'll just make this much more. I don't have to change that one. All right, so I have more of them. It's on the fly creating all of these samples of voxels, and we're starting to get smoothing between them a little bit, but we can go in there and make this above, and it's not enabled, thank you. And we get that. So this shape here is something that's very difficult to get from water simulations. It's not 100% accurate, but it's a little more natural because the tendency of a lot of water simulations that do meshing is to be very like spherical, like blobby. And this is a little bit more organic. It would be nice if you could do some other things with it, but right out of the gate, this is actually very, very useful to be able to get this kind of strange shape here. And you can do quite a lot of things, including you can use deformers on the original polygons, particles here, to allow you to do a bit of control over where things go. So if we go to Maya and we go to their particle system here, we create an object. We go over to the effects menu. We have end particles, and we also have regular particles or legacy particles. So there's actually 3 different types of particles inside of Maya. And the delineation between the 3 of them are legacy is just the original ones. These here in the middle, the emitters, are not hooked up to end particles. And then the top one is hooked up to an end particle, meaning that uniform simulation environment. So if I take this and, let's see, we'll fill this object. Then we go into wireframe. It's filled that area right there. And they drop out. And if you've used RealFlow, this is pretty much the same kind of thing. You'll get just like a droplet of water, and you can change it. So it's not quite what you would expect, though. You would expect it to emit and then keep emitting. So I'm just going to delete that. And in Maya, I've gotten in the habit of opening up my outliner here and deleting anything that's in there to make sure that it is not still hanging around. So I'm going to go in and emit from this object. Let's see. Do I want it? Yeah, I'll do it like this. All right, so we're getting pretty good speed from that. And we're able to do a couple things to it. So if I take this object and press play, I can't move it. And it's the same problem because it's that one updated, thankfully, but it doesn't update as quickly as you would anticipate. And yes, it's a lot of points on here, but it's using that same N environment, that nucleus environment. And it would be nice to be able to have the manipulators on there as we go. So can I track the motion of these particles? Like with Tracer, no, unless I script it. But I can mesh it. Let's see. They built it into it. Yeah. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to do the next version of it, which is Bifrost, because that has it. So we will create a liquid and take this and delete that and add an emitter to it. And we're getting into the error part of my demonstration, which is you see there's a bunch of things hanging around here like Nucleus and Bifrost. Nucleus was the first implementation of a unified simulation environment. Bifrost is the second implementation of it. They don't work together. So when you try particles and you go, oh, you know what, I need to try the next version of the particle system because it does this thing, it leaves these things hanging around and you have to get rid of them. So I have to go in there and delete all of these. And now I'm left with what I think is a mesh as I'm looking. It's not. This is actually the Bifrost tool that would have meshed it, but there's no particles in there, but it doesn't get rid of it. So I have to delete that too. So I'm going to now go in and create a liquid. And it starts doing a pre-cache and then a full cache, which is the green. I have to wait till it starts rewinding, and you can see, I think, you can't see, but trust me, there's a bunch of little dots falling right now. Right there. And I can mesh them. So, and I can scrub now that the entire thing is green. So let me just go to here and go to my Bifrost liquid mesh, and you can see that that's the meshing side of it. And I'll just select this. You have to select the right thing. So meshing enabled, on, and now we have a mesh. All right, and it does render. It's lava. But the reason it's red is because the default renderer in Maya doesn't actually render its own tools. So you have to use another renderer that's in there. And honestly, I'm trying not to, as much as possible, like, quote, make fun of Maya, but like, it writes itself. The jokes write itself. Like, I'm just doing this, and this is what it's doing. In fact, it hasn't happened yet, but I tried in my presentation to come to a point where I could show a repeatable crash of Maya. And of course, it didn't crash while I was doing this, but while I was using the N-hair, it would crash on me every time I used it when I cranked it up, but I decided not to. I didn't want to put you guys through me having to force quit and all that stuff. But there is some kind of bug, and I know it's 2 versions back, but it's 2 versions back because they told me not to use the version that's newer than this. So this is a way of me meshing particles, but I cannot drag another object inside of Bifrost and get that meshing like you can with the volume object. So it's not flexible enough to be able to swap tools back and forth, and that really is the crux of what I want to say. It's like when it comes to a pipeline, and at World Wrestling Entertainment we have 30 artists. Now, we're never going to have 30 artists working on one thing, but we will have 30 artists working on different aspects of one thing and sharing that data and potentially sharing that scene, and the flexibility to change something when a producer says the day before something airs, we need to change that, and that's happened many, many times. To be able to just swap something out and not have to redo it is a huge thing. I've gotten used to saying, when people say, why did you switch? I say it like this. I used to spend 5 days doing one thing, and now I'm doing 5 things in one day. And that makes a huge difference to the amount of stuff that I can put in front of one of my freelance clients and say, look, do you like this one or the next 4 after that? And if they like it, I can instantly enable that one, and then it's, quote, done. Or I know the direction that I want to go. And I think that makes all the difference in the world in terms of a pipeline. But it's a pipeline at its mid-range. It's not an Industrial Light and Magic huge movie pipeline. But they need scripters to do that. And if you wanted cinema to work in a film environment, you would need scripters as well. But you definitely can be more productive inside of cinema just right out of the gate. So let me just check my time here. So I left the last 20-ish minutes for questions, but like I said, you were welcome to say whatever you wanted to. But if there's anything in Maya that you wanted to see, since it can take a while, I wanted to give this time, and I have some things prepared in case you don't have things that you want to see in Maya. If you want me to just shut down Maya, I can do that too, and it can just stay in cinema.
It looks like the Bifrost workflow is more interactive than the Providence one, right?
Mm-hmm.
It actually looked like it's less interactive because of this thinking process.
Yes, and they say to you that that it is more interactive because it's a background process. But actually what it is it's an entire, Bifrost is an entire application that's running in the background, and it's being cached, and then the cache is being fed back into Maya in real time. And that's why we're seeing what's going on with the yellow and the red. From what I understand, they're taking the entire simulation environment and using Bifrost in it. And they purchased Naiad software, and I was kind of disheartened to learn that NIOD was going away because I thought it was excellent and very fast. And I think that the people running it are incredibly intelligent. But I'm worried, not that I have to worry about it, but like as somebody that works around Maya and has to work with people that use Maya, I'm worried that that paradigm of having everything external to Maya is potentially a problem because you don't have that interactivity. You certainly don't have that like instant feedback like you get in cinema. And it has one advantage in that if you update that one executable that lives outside of Maya, then you can change everything, and I think that's potentially an advantage. I don't know, you would know much more than I would, whether if you have a team working on Bifrost and another team working on Maya, if you can get more work done in the same amount of time. My guess is you could, but you're going to end up having things you need to deal with in terms of their communication between each other. So. It is. It is in Maya. It's partially Bifrost and it's partially remnants of the IP that they took from Softimage. But a lot of the Softimage people have left, and they some of them went to Side Effects to work on Houdini. Some went in other places. I know there's a few. I don't know if they were ICE people, but I know a few people went to Maxon. But there was talk in the beginning of it doing what Softimage ICE did. And what ICE did that was really, and I might have told you this before in an email, what I thought was groundbreaking was it didn't matter whether it was a particle or a piece of geometry. A point was a point was a point. And that's how it dealt with it. The promise that I've been hearing for 4 or 5 years or whatever it's been that Bifrost has been in there is that they're going to get to that, but they haven't yet. And my worry is that with an external application being able to control scene elements inside of Maya, there's a lot of translation that will have to go back and forth between the two. And ICE's advantage at the time was it was embedded and it could touch anything in the entire application. And it was very fast because of that. It's much the same problem you get with rendering when, for instance, you had to take Octane and move, export it out to external renderer and then render it. That was a slow process. That translation was a slow process. And I just feel like this is kind of heading down that same path. I could be wrong about that, but any other questions? Mm-hmm. They're the 3D department. I should be careful, but the 3D department, because everybody careful only. Not that I'm going to get in trouble, but because they're all really good artists. But the 3D department is of the mind that you have to use Maya, but to be fair to them, that's what they know, and so of course they're going to be faster in Maya. The 2D department uses After Effects and Cinema. And then there's a couple people that kind of go back and forth between them that can use both Maya and Cinema, and I was one of them, and now that I'm sort of in this different role, I have done things like, we had a pay-per-view which was called Balls of Fire, and I said we should use Turbulence FD that Joshua makes, and they had never used it before. We purchased it for them in the 3D department. I taught them how to use it in a matter of a few minutes. And we had another person that was a Maya person using Maya's volumetric liquid fluid. Liquid isn't really right, fluids, I should say. And she was very impressed with what Turbulence could do and the speed of the rendering and the simulation. They tried to see if they could do it and stay inside of Maya, and ultimately the benefit to that was not worth it because the speed and the quality was so much better using Cinema with Turbulence FD. So they will use whatever works best for the job, but in general, the 3D department kind of like wraps everything around Maya. It took about a year for me to introduce Nuke to the department, and now they're actually mandating that everybody learns Nuke in the department, new people and the people that have been there. So they're sort of moving away from the After Effects legacy. So hopefully I keep pushing cinema, mostly because I see when people start to use it, they get excited about what they can do. The one guy in 3D that, his name is Dave, shout out to Dave Durand. Dave sat next to me in the 2D department and watched what I was doing in cinema and thought I was just a cinema guy. And then I said, no, I have many years experience with Maya, but look at the cool stuff that you can do. And I showed him what you could do. And then one day I noticed him teaching himself, and he would ask me a couple questions. And like I said, I was only in that department about 2.5 months. And he learned so much in those 2.5 months on his own. And now he often says, hey, let's do part or all of this in cinema. And I think he's like patient zero in the 3D department. He's just going to spread throughout the whole 3D department. Or at least that's my hope. Any other questions or anything? Yes? We sometimes do render it in both and composite it together. When it's something like fire or liquid, there's a little bit of wiggle room, so it's okay. But the preference would be to render it in one environment. And when we do that, yes, it's usually alembic, but if it's something like smoke, we have to use VDB. So, and VDB is fantastic. It's just we don't have the option in as many tools that we have that can use VDB. So often we just swap the camera. We translate the camera into cinema, we render it in cinema, and then we composite it in Nuke afterwards. And it works fine because frankly, it's not as compact, but it's faster because we can render like the fire, for instance, on one workstation, and then the background geometry that's on fire on the render farm. And then, frankly, the fire will be finished before the 30-node render farm will finish the geometry, depending on how complex the scene is. So that's actually like a swap. And I would say this even if he wasn't here. There's a swap that happened where at some point volumetric rendering was like, it was sort of like global illumination. You had to think about it and really feel like I'm going to implement it, I'm going to leave extra time, and I'm going to do it this time. And I have to leave enough room for mistakes and to happen, and Moore's Law, or not Moore's Law, Murphy's Law. But now it's flopped, and it's actually faster to render a lot of these effects than it was. Like, does anybody even think about flipping on global illumination anymore? Probably not that often. And I remember, and I've made the point that I'm old, but I remember simulating it in Lightwave by putting lights underneath the floor and shining them up at the specific color that the floor was. But the problem was, what if you had a tile floor? So you would have to put like a point light at the location of every bright tile that was that color. And it had an advantage, it rendered fast and it looked good, but you change the number of tiles in that floor, you have to change the number of lights. So there's a trade-off between the speed and the ease of use and all that stuff. But all these things eventually come true. And now we have NVIDIA saying for $800, you can have a real-time ray tracing piece of hardware. So I immediately changed my order for all of our machines that we're upgrading. And now we have 3 2080 Ti's going in each one of our new machines. So that'll be a lot of fun to play with. Anything else? I do have some things I was going to show you, but they're completely unnecessary. If you have questions, I'd rather answer your questions. Yes, yeah, it does. It's called MASH. It was a tool purchased from the people, I forgot the name of the company, but they used to make a Softimage rendered television show, which was called Reboot in like the 90s. And then they made some tools, and they gave away the tools, and some of them I think they sold, and MASH was purchased from them, from that company, whatever the name of it was, and I apologize, I can't remember. So MASH, MASH is the one thing that I cannot seem to get my head around. It's sort of like the Blender of Maya, the way I look at it, but I will tell you that if we go into effects, it's in here somewhere. Oh, you know what? I probably didn't add it to the plug. And if I did, it might not even still be there. MASH bundle. Oh, it is loaded. All right. So if I unload it and then reload it, it gives me an error. It's called MASH. Like I said, I don't know how to really use it, but it does have some of the same things, and I can't see it because of the screen resolution on here. I know it's in either effects or whatever, or animation. I'll just take a minute or two to look for it. If I had a easier search, it would be faster to find. Did you know that that was a tool right there behind that little? And this is just too easy. So you can hide these tools here by that. It's not really intuitive. I actually found them one day by just like making a mistake. I meant to click on one of these, and I clicked over here, and it opened it up. And I'm like, whoa, what was that? I can't find MASH right now. Oh, but this is sort of similar to what I was talking about before. These are some legacy tools that don't work with anything except for themselves right now. So this is the shatter tool. Come on, shatter. It might not even work with itself now. Shatter. Here we go. Solid shatter. I have to change the number of them. We'll do some jagginess and up the seed. Yeah, there's an error in the mel code. So it doesn't work with itself. And I honestly didn't plan that because it worked this morning. So it basically creates a shatter effect, and I wanted to show this. This is actually helping my point a little bit more, but I wanted to show this because I'm sure now you've all had a chance to use the Voronoi shatter inside of Cinema, and it's very, very flexible. And here, this is one of those examples of I have to tell it how many pieces that I want. And so it says 5 there. I could change that, but I can't change it ever after the fact. I have to reshatter the entire thing. The other tool, this one might work. This is a little easier. I have to select them both and make lightning. Yes, this one works. Wow. There we go. I think I was too fast for it. If I go slow, it's fine. If I go really fast, I think it freaks out a little bit. So this, I'm sure you would know how to do this, very fast and very easily inside of Cinema. It does actually render, and it has a glow on there. By the way, don't ever render anything with the glow, because you'll never be able to get rid of the glow. Just add the glow in compositing, please. I beg you, just do it that way. I've had to tell so many people that. You have control over the extrusion, the scale, but it's not what you think it is. See, I'm scaling it like this, and that isn't scale along the length of it. It's not really like having a sweep. This one's flat. If I make it tube, we get a little bit idea of what it does. So it's sort of like a sweep, but it's not really. If I go to flat, it's pretty much the same thing, except it doesn't have any shading on it. I don't know why you would want shading on some lightning anyway, but you have a little bit more shading on there. And then we can see all the tools that are built into here. So the lightning actually has quite a lot of stuff. It actually uses an IK system, a skeleton system, to do its lightning effect with all of this crap to create that, including having to have constraints on the start of the IK and the effector at the end in order to have it follow along with the object. So it's, I mean, I give it credit, at least it works on like the shatter, but it's, it does not work with anything else unless you wanted to have a character made out of lightning because it was IK, but you can't like actually select the geometry of an object and have lightning coming off that character because it needs two objects, a start and an end, for you to do that. So then you would need to have an end that's hidden. So there's just, it's not great, but it's an old tool. I will give it that. So let's go to the fire, because I didn't know you were going to be here, but I was going to show this anyway. So hopefully this will work. Yeah, it worked. All right, so what it does is does this, it's sort of like simulation, but it's not really. It's fast, but it's using front-facing flat objects, and yeah, and you get some of the details in the fire there because each one of those spheres has a 3D texture on it that has some alpha, and it's stretched up. So if you get enough of these, you start to notice that the fire detail isn't going with the flow. Every sphere has its own like upward facing thing. And it's, again, to be fair, it's an old tool, but this is still in there, and it doesn't work with anything else. It's sort of its own like standalone thing. So get rid of this. And
This is, by the way, how most game engines would be for.
yes, right. And although they would look a lot better, but they're newer than this tool is. But now we have ray tracing, and we might get better results in volumetric stuff someday. And then smoke. Oh, sorry, the smoke doesn't work, and the smoke doesn't work because I have all of this stuff left over from when I did the fire. So I have to get rid of this group of stuff and then get rid of all of this and all of this stuff that was set up for that. And then if I go into effects and smoke, and it still doesn't work. So it's essentially the same thing, it just renders gray. So Maya is a collection of, at the time they come out, groundbreaking tools, but each one I look at as its own little universe of like having an idea or a light bulb, like this is really cool if we could do this. Then they have another idea, and they're looking for the sales hook for selling the software, and I completely get that. You need to, otherwise there wouldn't be any employees developing the software. The problem is when you are an artist, you're the end receiver of this, and you have this universe that's sort of self-contained and then this other one, and they don't talk to each other. You have to make a choice between the two, which one are you going to use, and somewhat like what I showed you with the shatter and the smoke, you could easily be put in a situation where that tool isn't supported really anymore, so like, you know, it's your problem that you're using such an old tool. And cinema is, in my opinion, has not been like that since I've been using it. And I really have gotten to know the people at Maxon over the years, and that's another reason that I absolutely am proud to use this software, because the people make a big difference. Any other questions or anything? All right, so thank you very much. Thanks for not falling asleep. And I really appreciate you letting me talk for 2 hours.